disparities in terms of policing, and you had said that it's not just sort of in certain neighborhoods, but also maybe even the color of their skin, not sort of the darker they are. Can you speak to that a little bit? I guess in terms of both policing and other areas of the criminal justice system, do you notice differences not just on sort of broad categories, right, of white versus black, but sort of across the skin tone spectrum? Just because Miami is very diverse, right? We have a melting pot, and so I'm just curious, that comment that you said sort of made me think about, is there sort of a spectrum, or is it really just black and white?
No, I mean, I think I hate the term implicit bias in a lot of ways, because we talk a ton about that in the criminal justice system, and that'll solve it. Because I'm like, there's plenty of explicit racism. So I'm like, why don't we deal with the explicit racist before? I have officers who are racists. They're a judge who just are explicitly racist. They're not saying it out loud. But I'm like, why do we just give everyone the benefit of the doubt these days and assume, right? I mean, if the last administration taught us anything, it's that a lot of people like to be explicit about their races and were upset that they couldn't have been more explicit about it until someone came in office and told them it was okay. So a lot of the implicit bias stuff bothers me, because I think we just have pure racism going on. I think Javier Ortiz in the City of Miami Police Department is just a racist, like, period. Just does not like people of color, and is really trying to create a society where, like, white Cuban men like him have more power, and he wants to fight against people who aren't that, and to do what he can with his power to degrade them, or to diminish their power. So, and I think there's some of that for sure. So I think there's explicit racism for sure. But then I also think there's just something that's ingrained in people that says that if a potentially violent looking act is committed by someone with a light skin tone, it feels less violent than someone with a darker skin tone. And an example is the stuff if you look at Twitter comments on the stuff that in Miami Beach, right? So you'll see a fist fight in Miami Beach during spring break with very dark skinned black males. And people write in the Twitter comments, like, look at these animals, and just really racially charged comments that increase the violence. Yet I have speculation, I'm from the Midwest and I went to Notre Dame undergrad. If you showed a video of white kids fist fighting outside of Notre Dame Stadium, they'd be like, oh, those drunk kids, like, that's
they're just
funny.
Getting out of hand.
Yeah, they're just being rascals, like, stuff like that. And so with people so now back to the implicit bias thing. I think even with people who aren't explicitly racist and don't see themselves that way, I think that when they see, especially men, young men, but especially people who look darker, they just perceive that person and things they have seen on maybe a video of a case or something as more violent and more potentially dangerous. I think it's really complicated why we have that, right? But, like, why that's in our brains and what that happens. But I think that happens for sure. So yeah, I can think of cases where I've represented people accused of doing bad, horrific things, right? And as when trying to not at all excuse the crime but contextualize it, you'll present a prosecutor with context on it. Undiagnosed PTSD from military service that led to alcoholism. And on this particular day, a lot of alcohol mixed with meth led to a really bad thing. And no one's saying this person isn't deserving of punishment, but it should take into account, both this person's background, they've never done this thing before, and these mitigating factors. And it seems to be that, especially with, like lighter skinned Hispanic males or white males, prosecutors might be more willing to make that, to internalize that, to think, okay, this person isn't inherently violent and bad, but they certainly did a violent bad thing. And maybe it's partially a result of environmental factors. So maybe instead of a 10-year sentence, we do a 5-year sentence with 5 years of probation where we address these things. And hey, if it doesn't work after your probation, you get violated. But maybe addressing those things will prevent it. That human beings, right, aren't inherently violent or not violent, at least most of them. Like most people don't wake up John Wayne Gacy, but given circumstances and things like that. Whereas that does seem to me to be harder with, people with darker skin colors. And I think usually, like partially it's just because of when they watch a video of the crime, it seems worse to them when the person is darker. And I also think just because of, perceptions or worries that, I don't know, people with darker skin tones are more violent for whatever reason. So I've seen some of that. And then you also just have, cultural norms. So people whose cultural norms are the minority compared to society get treated worse because judges perceive them as disrespectful even when they're not intended to be. So, so certain people may talk like an example would be like, I don't know, right? Like a young black male who wears his pants a certain way, right? Like that Bill Cosby pull your pants up kid thing.
Right.
Bill Cosby being a moral imperative is
a lot of problems there,
a lot of problems there. But I think sometimes judges perceive, especially young men of color who are not trying to be disrespectful, as being more disrespectful because they answer like, as opposed to like, yes
or yes, Your Honor.
Yes, sir, yes, Your Honor. Even when it's not intentional, when it's more just like cultural norms. And, even things like, I think a lot of judges would compare like a client with a short haircut is more contrite, less dangerous, and like, less of a potential menace to society than the same exact client with the same exact grade, same exact criminal history, same exact job, than a client who has short dreads that are like over his eyes. You know what I mean? That hang over his eyes. I think a lot of judges still, have that, like those congressional hearings we had in the 90s, like the rap music is going to kill our children is awful. In some ways, right, as a society, we've moved beyond that. Snoop Dogg is on The View. Like in some ways, what used to be called gangster rap is now so mainstream it's ludicrous, right? Like those people who they thought were going to ruin our society are now like literally sitting next to is like wholesome people on TV shows.
Right, or like CEOs of companies now,
Yeah. But I still think that's perception. That perception can happen. That look, I think, portrays to certain people. And then I also think it's sometimes the look thing too can be associated with socioeconomic status. So it's perceived that someone who comes dressed to court charged with a crime who comes dressed to court in a suit and a tie and shoes is being respectful, where a person who comes dressed to court in a shirt, jeans, and slides is being disrespectful. When it might be, maybe it is, but maybe it's that the person just can't afford those other clothes or doesn't have them. And what it says to me, I actually think about this sociologically all the time. When people are so casual about court and cases, I'm like, doesn't this tell you that this system has become so, like, its reach is so wide that this is just normal to people? This is getting in court's just another day, because we don't use the criminal justice system anymore to take the one bad person out of 100,000. It's become so much a part of our lives. So many people have been arrested, right? When you can get arrested for driving with a suspended license, and something like 30% of license in Florida, people in Florida have had their license suspended, right? And that's a crime. When we criminalize such a wide swath of thing, and we criminalize so many people who look somewhere, this has become so normal that a court appearance no longer feels like this big thing. It's just something else you do, because we've made this such a normal part of certain people's lives.
Right, it's almost a rite of passage in certain areas.
Yeah, but also that it's just so normal. Everyone knows someone who's done it. Like, it happens to everyone. That to me is just crazy. Like, because if the criminal justice system is supposed to solely address deviant behavior, right? Like deviant, really abnormal behavior, and such that it's so bad that we've decided all of the money and time and effort and all those other awful things that come through it, that it should be used, then wow, we're saying like I don't know. It just seems to me like a properly used criminal justice system would be used a lot less, and it would be a big shock to a person's system to be arrested and charged with a crime. But I think for a lot of people, neighborhoods, and areas, it's not at all. Because we allow, I think a famous conservative Supreme Court justice said, like, that all you have to do is follow a certain person in the car for a certain amount of time.